North, the imperial allies, the Portuguese, and not only the coast, but the rivers of the Celestial Empire, seemed to be at their discretion. And yet their formidable association did not many months survive this event. It was not, however, defeat that reduced it to the obedience of the laws. On the contrary, that extraordinary woman, the widow of Ching Yih, and the daring Paou were victorious and more powerful than ever, when dissensions broke out amongst the pirates themselves. Ever since the favor of the chieftainess had elevated Paou to the general command, there had been enmity and altercations between him and the chief, O po tae, who commanded one of the flags or divisions of the fleet, and it was only by the deference and respect they both owed to Ching Yih's widow that they had been prevented from turning their arms against each other long before. At length, when the brave Paou was surprised and cooped up by a strong blockading force of the Emperor's ships, O po tae showed all his deadly spite, and refused to obey the orders of Paou, and even of the chieftainess, which were that he should sail to the relief of his rival. Paou, with his bravery and usual good fortune, broke through the blockade, but when he came in contact with O po tae, his rage was too violent to be restrained. O po tae at first pleaded that his means and strength had been insufficient to do what had been expected of him, but concluded by saying, "Am I bound to come and join the forces of Paou?" "Would you then separate before us?" cried Paou, more enraged than ever. O po tae answered, "I will not separate myself." "How? Why then do you not obey the orders of the wife of Ching Yih and my own? What is this else than separation, that you do not come to assist me when I am surrounded by the enemy? I have sworn it that I will destroy thee, wicked man, that I may do away with this soreness on my back." The summons of Paou when blockaded to O po tae was in language equally figurative. "I am harassed by the government's officers outside in the sea. Lips and teeth must help one another. If the lips are cut away, the teeth will feel cold. How shall I alone be able to fight the government forces? You should therefore come to the head of your crew to attack the government squadron in the rear. I will then come out of my station and make an attack in front. The enemy being so taken in the front and rear will, even supposing we cannot master him, certainly be thrown into disorder." The angry words of Paou were followed by others, and then by blows. Paou, though at the moment far inferior in force, first began the fight, and ultimately sustained a sanguinary defeat, and the loss of 16 vessels. Our loathing for this cruel, detestable race must be increased by the fact that the victors massacred all their prisoners, or 300 men. This was the death blow to the confederacy which had so long defied the Emperor's power, and which might have effected his dethronement. O po tae, dreading the vengeance of Paou and his mistress, Ching Yih's widow, whose united forces would have quintupled his own, gained over his men to his views, and proffered a submission to government, on condition of free pardon and a proper provision for all. The petition of the pirates is so curious a production, and so characteristic of the Chinese, that it deserves to be inserted at length. It is my humble opinion that all robbers of an overwhelming force, whether they had their origin from this or any other cause, have felt the humanity of government at different times. Liang Shang, who 3 years plundered the city, was nevertheless pardoned, and at last made a minister of state. Wakang often challenged the arms of the country, and he was suffered to live, and at last made a cornerstone of the empire. Ju Ming pardoned 7 times Mang Huao, and Kwang Kung 3 times set Chao Chao at liberty. Ma Huen persuaded not the exhausted robbers, and Yo Fai killed not those who made their submission. There are many instances of such transactions both in former and recent times, by which the country was strengthened, and government increased its power. We now live in a very populous age. Some of us could not agree with their relations, and were driven out like noxious weeds. Some, after having tried all they could, without being able to provide for themselves, at last joined bad society. Some lost their property by shipwrecks. Some withdrew into this watery empire to escape from punishment. In such a way, those who in the beginning were only 3 or 5 were in the course of time increased to 1,000 or 10,000, and so it went on increasing every year. Would it not have been wonderful if such a multitude, being in want of their daily bread, had not resorted to plunder and robbery to gain their subsistence, since they could not in any other manner be saved from famine? It was from necessity that the laws of the empire were violated, and the merchants robbed of their goods. Being deprived of our land and of our native places, having no house or home to resort to, and relying only on the chance of wind and water, even could we for a moment forget our griefs, we might fall in with a man of war, who with stones, darts, and guns would knock out our brains. Even if we dared to sail up a stream, and boldly go on, with anxiety of mind under wind, rain, and stormy weather, we must everywhere prepare for fighting. Whether we went to the east or to the west, and after having felt all the hardships of the sea, the night dew was our only dwelling, and the rude wind our meal. But now we will avoid these perils, leave our connections, and desert our comrades. We will make our submission. The power of government knows no bounds. It reaches to the islands in the sea, and every man is afraid, and sighs. Oh, we must be destroyed by our crimes. None can escape who opposeth the laws of the government. May you then feel compassion for those who are deserving of death. May you sustain us by your humanity. The government that had made so many lamentable displays of its weakness were glad to make an unreal parade of its mercy. It was but too unhappy to grant all the conditions instantly, and in the fulsome language of its historians, feeling that compassion is the way of heaven, that it is the right way to govern by righteousness, it therefore redeemed these pirates from destruction, and pardoned their former crimes. O po tae, however, then struck his free flag, and the pirates were hardly in the power of the Chinese, when it was proposed by many that they should all be treacherously murdered. The governor happened to be more honorable and humane, or probably only more politic than those who had made this foul proposal. He knew that such a bloody breach of faith would forever prevent the pirates still in arms from voluntarily submitting. He knew equally well, even weakened as they were by O po tae's defection, that the government could not reduce them by force, and he thought by keeping his faith with them he might turn the force of those who had submitted against those who still held out, and so destroy the pirates with the pirates. Consequently, the 8,000 men it had been proposed to cut off in cold blood were allowed to remain uninjured, and their leader, O po tae, having changed his name to that of Ho Bin, or the Lustre of Instruction, was elevated to the rank of an imperial officer. The widow of Cheng Yi and her favorite Pao continued for some months to pillage the coast, and to beat the Chinese and the Mandarin's troops and ships, and seemed almost as strong as before the separation of O po tae's flag. But that example was probably operating in the minds of many of the outlaws, and finally the lawless heroine herself, who was the spirit that kept the complicated body together, seeing that O po tae had been made a government officer, and that he continued to prosper, began also to think of making her submission. "I am," said she, "10 times stronger than O po tae, and government will perhaps, if I submit, act towards me as they have done with O po tae." A rumor of her intentions having reached shore, the Mandarin sent off a Captain Chow, a doctor of Macao, who, said the historian, being already well acquainted with the pirates, did not need any introduction, to enter on preliminaries with them. When the worthy practitioner presented himself to Paou, that friend concluded he had been committing some crime, and had come for safety to that general refugium peccatorum, the pirate fleet. The doctor explained, and assured the chief that if he would submit, government was inclined to treat him and his far more favorably and more honorably than O po tae, but if he continued to resist, not only a general arming of all the coasts and rivers, but O po tae was to proceed against him. At this part of his narrative, our Chinese historian is again so curious that I shall quote his words at length. When Fai Hiang Chao came to Paou, he said, "Friend Paou, do you know why I come to you?" Paou: "Thou hast committed some crime, and comest to me for protection." Chow: "By no means." Paou: "You will then know how it stands concerning the report about our submission, if it is true or false?" Chow: "You are again wrong here, sir. what are you in comparison with O po tae?